The town was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that made people uneasy. Dust rose slowly from the narrow streets, and the sun hung low, casting long shadows between the old buildings. Life here was simple but fragile. Most people kept to themselves, knowing that trouble could arrive without warning. He had lived in this town all his life, and he had learned to stay out of trouble. To live quietly and let others live their lives, he had a routine. Wake up early, do his work, help his neighbors when he could, and return home before nightfall. It was a safe life, maybe even boring, but it was his life, and he liked it that way. That afternoon, however, the calm was shattered in an instant. A group of armed men appeared on the far side of the street, moving quickly and purposefully. Their faces were hidden, their intentions clear. Shouts echoed between the buildings, and the people on the street froze, unsure whether to run or hide. Panic spread like wildfire. Children clung to their mothers, shopkeepers grabbed what they could, and the sound of gunfire tore through the air. He had never been in a situation like this. He had seen violence on the news and heard stories from other towns, but he had never experienced it himself. Fear gripped him, and his instincts screamed at him to find safety. But then he saw her. She was standing near the corner of the street, frozen in terror. Her eyes were wide, her hands shaking, and she seemed unable to move as bullets tore the air around her. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. Without thinking, without planning, he ran toward her. He didn't know who she was, where she had come from, or why she was there. All he knew was that if he didn't act, she would be in grave danger. He reached her just as the gunfire intensified. With no time to hesitate, he pushed her behind him and crouched low, shielding her with his own body. He felt the impact of a bullet graze his shoulder, the sting sharp and burning, but he ignored the pain. The world had narrowed down to that single moment. Protect her, survive, and do whatever it took. The sounds of chaos surrounded them. The shouts, the explosions of gunfire, the screams of frightened townspeople. Time seemed to stretch and slow down, each second feeling like a lifetime. He could feel her trembling behind him, hear her quiet whimpers, and it made him hold her closer. Even though there was little space to move, he whispered to her, trying to calm her fears, even though his own heart was pounding in his chest. "It's going to be okay," he said, though he didn't know if it would be. "Just stay close to me. I won't let anything happen to you." For what felt like hours but was only minutes, they crouched there, moving only when he thought he could shift her out of the line of fire. Each step was careful, deliberate, as he guided her through alleys and behind overturned carts, using whatever cover he could find. He remembered thinking how fragile life felt, how quickly everything could be taken away in an instant. And yet he also felt a strange clarity, a sense of purpose he had never known before. Finally, they found a small doorway leading into a partially abandoned building. He pushed her inside and made sure she stayed low, hidden from view. She looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and fear, and he realized he didn't even know her name. But names didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was that she was safe. He stayed with her until the sounds of gunfire faded into the distance. His shoulder ached sharply and his legs trembled from the adrenaline and exhaustion, but he refused to let it stop him. When the street outside finally fell silent, he helped her move a little farther into the building, making sure she was out of danger. She leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath, and he did the same. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. All that existed was the shared relief of surviving something that could have ended everything. After a while, she hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not sure it matters," she said. And in that instant, he realized something important. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he had acted, that he had made a choice to help someone in need when no one else had. But even as relief settled over them, shadow of worry remained. Who were the attackers? Why had they come to the town? And why was she there alone, in the middle of all this danger? He didn't know, and he had no time to find out. Soon, he would need to leave, to ensure his own safety. But he also knew he couldn't just abandon her. They had survived together, and that bond, however brief, had already changed something in him. Eventually, the chaos outside faded completely. He helped her to her feet, making sure she could walk on her own. "You should go," he said gently. "Find somewhere safe. I'll stay here for a little while longer." She shook her head, unsure what to do, and he realized the decision was not easy for her either. They shared a look, a silent understanding that words couldn't capture. In the end, she nodded slowly and moved toward the shadows at the back of the building. Disappearing into safety, he remained behind for a few moments longer, making sure the street was clear and no immediate danger remained. His body was sore, his shoulder burning, his mind racing with questions and thoughts he couldn't yet answer. He knew he had been lucky to survive. He knew she had been lucky as well. And he also knew that their encounter, brief as it was, had left a mark on both of them. When he finally left the building and returned to his home, the quiet of the town felt different. It was no longer just a simple, peaceful place. It was a place that had tested him, a place where life and death had collided in the most sudden, terrifying way. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she? Where had she come from? And most importantly, would he ever see her again? That night, as he lay in bed nursing his wounds, he replayed the afternoon over and over in his mind. Every sound, every movement, every choice he had made felt vivid, almost like a movie in his head. He thought about how fear could paralyze people, how courage could save them, and how a single decision could change the course of someone else's life. He had acted without thinking, but now he realized that sometimes instinct and heart mattered more than thought. And though he didn't know it yet, the events of that day would not remain confined to the streets of the small town. The woman he had saved, the strangers who had watched from the edges of the chaos, and the choices he had made in those few critical minutes would ripple outward in ways he could never imagine. A life saved in a moment of courage would soon create consequences that no human could predict. But for now, all he could do was rest, recover, and try to make sense of what had happened. He didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. One selfless act, one moment of courage, had set a chain of events into motion that would challenge everything he knew about life, loyalty. In the unexpected ways people can come together in times of crisis and in the quiet of the night. With his shoulder throbbing and his mind racing, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter what happened next, he would never forget the fear in her eyes, nor the relief when he had shielded her from harm. That moment would stay with him forever. The days after that terrifying afternoon passed slowly, almost painfully so. The town had returned to a semblance of normal, but for him, nothing felt the same. Life seemed quieter, yet heavier. The images of Gunfire, of frightened faces, and most of all, of her terrified eyes, stayed in his mind. He tried to focus on his work, on his routines, but it was impossible to push the memory away. Every corner of the town, every shadow along the street, reminded him of that moment when he had had to make a split-second decision, one that had saved her life. His shoulders still throbbed with pain, a constant reminder of the bullet that had grazed him. He had patched himself up as best he could, but simple movements lifting objects, bending down, even walking sent sharp stabs of pain through his body. Yet he refused to complain. Injuries were part of life, and he had survived. That was what mattered. Still, the pain made it hard to sleep, and he often found himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling. Thinking about what had happened and who the woman might be, he tried to convince himself that it had been just one afternoon, one act of instinct. Heroes weren't made by choice. He told himself they were just ordinary people reacting to extraordinary circumstances. But deep inside, he knew something had changed. He felt different, as if a part of him had been awakened that he hadn't known existed. Courage and fear had collided inside him, and he had chosen courage. That choice left a mark, one that would not fade easily. Neighbors and friends had heard about the incident. Some came to check on him, praising his bravery, but he shrugged it off. He didn't feel brave. He had only done what anyone else might have done. But their words of admiration didn't comfort him, they made him uneasy. He wondered if they truly understood what it meant to be in that moment. To make the split-second decision to put another person's life above your own. Words could not capture it. And then came the strange signs. At first he thought it was just coincidence. Unmarked vehicles parked at odd times, people watching him from a distance, and occasional whispers he couldn't quite hear. He couldn't tell if it was connected to the woman or the attack, but the feeling of being watched made him tense. He tried to ignore it, telling himself that the town had always been full of curious eyes, that life simply had its watchers. But deep down he felt that something larger was at play, something he could not yet see or understand. Despite the fear, he tried to return to normal life. He went to the market, he visited the neighbors, he performed his daily tasks. But even these simple acts were tainted by the memory of that day. He found himself scanning the streets constantly, his senses heightened, noticing details he would have ignored before, the placement of vehicles, the positions of people, and even the way shadows moved across walls. Every slight sound made him flinch, every unfamiliar face drew his attention. He thought often about the woman. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she in that dangerous street alone? Questions swirled in his mind without answers. He had tried to speak to people who might have seen her after the attack, but no one knew. Some said she had disappeared into the alleys and might have left the town entirely. Others shrugged, claiming she was probably a traveler or someone passing through. The uncertainty gnawed at him. He didn't even know her name, and yet he felt responsible. As if a thread connected him to her in ways he could not explain, sleep became harder. At night, he would lie awake, replaying the scene over and over. The sounds of gunfire, the smell of smoke, the terror in her eyes, it all haunted him. Sometimes he imagined what would have happened if he had hesitated, if he had not acted. The thought made his chest tighten, and a cold fear would spread through him. But alongside that fear, there was a strange sense of pride. Not in heroism, but in survival. In the raw human instinct to protect someone else at great personal risk. Friends began to notice his change in behavior. He was quieter, more reflective, and sometimes distant. They would ask him questions, try to engage him in conversation, or encourage him to rest more. He would nod, smile faintly, and continue on, but their words only highlighted how much he had changed. He realized he could not share the weight of his thoughts with anyone. They simply couldn't understand. Only the woman, the one whose life he had saved, could truly connect to what he had experienced. Despite the physical and emotional strain, life forced him forward. He needed to eat, work, and survive as the town demanded. But every step he took outside reminded him of vulnerability. He noticed small things he had ignored before. A child wandering too close to the street. A loose window shutter swaying in the wind. The way strangers moved in patterns that felt unfamiliar. Everything seemed heightened. The attack had opened his eyes to the fragility of life, the unpredictability of danger, and the invisible threads that connected people in moments of crisis. One afternoon, as he walked through the market, he caught sight of a figure that made his heart skip a beat. For a moment he thought it was her, standing at the edge of the crowd. But when he blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only a sense of longing and uncertainty. His mind raced. Could it have been her? Was she back in town? Or had he merely imagined it, the longing for closure making his eyes play tricks on him? He would never know for sure, but the encounter, real or imagined, left him unsettled and curious. Even his work, something he had relied on for stability, became more difficult. He would start tasks, then pause, distracted by a sudden thought or a distant sound. He noticed details he had overlooked before, a shadow on a wall, a window slightly open, the pattern of footsteps on the dusty street. The world felt alive in a way it never had before, simultaneously beautiful and dangerous. He realized that survival had sharpened his senses and awakened a deep awareness of the world around him. Friends began to speak, rumors, whispers of groups visiting the town, of strangers asking questions, of a woman matching the description of the one he had saved being seen at the edges of nearby towns. He listened quietly, not sure what to believe. Part of him hoped it was her. Part of him feared it was something else entirely. His imagination became a battlefield of hope and fear, but he learned to navigate it carefully, never letting it overwhelm him entirely. One evening, He decided to revisit the street where the attack had occurred. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and the town seemed eerily calm. The street looked ordinary, but he knew better. Every corner held memories of that chaotic afternoon, the sounds of gunfire, fear in people's faces, and the moment he had shielded her from harm. He walked slowly, touching the walls, remembering the path they had taken, and imagining her beside him, safe and alive. The experience was both comforting and painful, a reminder of what had happened and what remained uncertain. As night fell, he returned home, exhausted, but unable to rest fully. The quiet of his room contrasted sharply with the chaos he had survived, and he realized that his mind would not let him forget. He lay awake, replaying every detail, wondering what the future held. He understood that life could change in an instant, that courage and fear were intertwined, and that a single act could ripple far beyond what anyone could see. Despite the uncertainty, he made a silent decision. He would remain vigilant, aware, and ready. If the woman returned, if the town faced danger again, he would be prepared. And even if nothing more happened, he would carry the memory of that day, the responsibility he felt, and the strange connection he had formed with someone he barely knew, but whose life had become inseparably linked with his own. And so, he moved through the days cautiously, his body healing, his mind alert, and his heart quietly holding on to hope. He did not know what the future would bring, nor whether he would see her again. But he understood one truth. Some moments, some choices, change a person forever. And this was one of those moments. The days passed, slow and heavy, yet filled with a strange tension. He felt that something was coming, something he could not yet understand. The world seemed larger, more complex, and filled with possibilities he had never imagined. And while he carried fear, he also carried hope, hope that the woman he had saved was safe, hope that life could bring answers, and hope that the courage he had shown that afternoon would not be forgotten. Days turned into a week, and life in the town continued its slow, uneven rhythm. Yet, for him, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Each morning he awoke to the same quiet streets, but with an underlying tension that refused to leave him. He moved carefully, watching the people around him. Noticing things he never had before the way, someone paused a moment too long at a corner. The cautious glance of a stranger entering the market. The hurried steps of children running home from school. Every detail seemed magnified, as though the world had become sharper, more precise, and more unpredictable. Even with all the vigilance, he could not shake the memory of Hertha, a woman whose life he had saved. He wondered where she had gone, what she had done after that terrifying day, and whether she was even alive. He imagined her traveling through unknown streets, hiding from danger, and seeking safety wherever she could. These thoughts often distracted him during his work, made him pause while walking down the street, and lingered in his mind as he tried to focus on simple tasks. Despite his attempts to return to normal, he felt as if he were waiting for something important, something that would change everything. And then, one afternoon, the wait ended. It began subtly. He noticed a few strangers and town men and women dressed neatly, walking calmly, not like the usual travelers or merchants. Their demeanor was different. They moved with a quiet confidence, as though they knew exactly where they were going and why they were there. At first he thought nothing of it. Perhaps they were visitors or traders. But as the day went on, he noticed that they seemed to be looking for someone. They asked discreet questions, observed the streets carefully, and paid attention to the smallest details. Something about their presence made him uneasy. By evening, the strangers had approached him directly. They did not come aggressively or loudly. Instead, they were calm, composed, and polite, but their words carried an authority that made him stand still. "We are looking for you," one of them said quietly, yet firmly. "We mean no harm. We have come because of something that happened days ago." His heart skipped a beat. The woman? Could it be that they were connected to her? He instinctively took a step back, uncertain of how to respond. The strangers introduced themselves carefully, explaining that they represented a community that rarely interacted with outsiders. Their tone was respectful, but carried a weight that made it clear they were not to be taken lightly. They spoke of honor, loyalty, and responsibility, concepts he had not encountered in his daily life, but felt immediately, deeply. And then they said something that stopped him cold. They had come because of the woman he had saved, and they wanted to meet him because his actions had been noticed and reported back to them. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Who were these people? How did they know about him? And why would saving one person matter to them so much? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The strangers seemed to understand his confusion, and they waited patiently, as if giving him the time to process what was happening. Finally, he managed to ask the question that had been burning inside him. The woman. The one I helped. Is she safe? The stranger nodded slowly. She is safe, they said. Because of you. Relief washed over him, stronger than anything he had felt since that terrifying day. He had feared the worst, that perhaps he had acted too late, that the outcome might have been tragic. But knowing she was alive filled him with a warmth he could not describe, a mix of gratitude, pride, and relief. Then came the part that stunned him. The strangers explained that she was not just any person. She belonged to a powerful, influential community, one that maintained strict codes of honor and expected loyalty from those who interacted with them. Saving her life, they said, was not something ordinary. It was considered a significant act of bravery and moral integrity. They had come to ensure that he understood the importance of his actions and to offer him recognition in a way that he could not have imagined. He listened carefully, trying to absorb every word. Their calm authority, the way they spoke with respect yet certainty, made it clear that this was serious. He felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. He was an ordinary man who had simply acted in a moment of instinct, yet somehow, that instinct had connected him to something far larger than himself. The idea was both overwhelming and humbling. The strangers did not press him to respond immediately. Instead, they explained their intentions and gave him time to process. They spoke of values he had never considered in such depth: duty, honor, and the bonds that tie people together, even across differences in culture, geography, and experience. They emphasized that their visit was not a threat, but a choice and opportunity that he could accept or decline. The weight of it all pressed down on him. He felt small, ordinary, and yet, in some way, extraordinarily important. For hours, he spoke calmly, detailing who they were, their community, and why his actions had mattered. He asked questions, trying to understand the depth of what they were saying. Each answer revealed more about the world he had never known, about lives that were carefully protected, about people who valued honor above everything else. He realized that this was a world very different from his own, yet somehow connected through a single act of courage, a single moment, when he had chosen to protect someone else, instead of thinking of his own safety. As the conversation continued, he began to feel a growing sense of responsibility. It was one thing to save someone in a moment of panic. It was another to realize that this act had consequences, that it had placed him in a position where his choices could matter to people he had never met before. He felt a mixture of pride and humility, realizing that his life was no longer entirely his own. He had become part of something larger, though he did not yet understand the full scope of it. The strangers reassured him that he was not obligated to do anything he did not want to do. The decision was his alone, and they respected his autonomy. Yet, the knowledge that his actions had made a difference, that they had reached people of influence, filled him with a strange sense of power and purpose. He began to see his life not just as a sequence of ordinary days, but as something that could have meaning beyond the familiar routines of his town. By the time the conversation ended, night had fallen. The street lamps cast soft light across the quiet town, and the usual sounds of evening distant dogs, footsteps on cobblestones, and the wind through the trees felt different somehow, charged with possibility. He watched the strangers leave, moving with the same calm, purposeful confidence with which they had arrived. He felt a mixture of relief and anticipation, as though the world had shifted slightly on its axis, and he was not sure if it would ever return to the way it had been that night. As he lay in bed, he could not stop thinking about what had happened. The stranger's words echoed in his mind, mingling with memories of her frightened eyes, the sound of gunfire, and the moment he had shielded her. He realized that his actions had connected him to a world far larger than his own, a world of honor, loyalty, and unseen responsibilities. And he understood something he had not known before: courage, even in the smallest moments, could reach far beyond what one could imagine. He did not yet know what the future held. He did not know if he would see her again, or if the strangers would return with their offer. But he understood that life had changed. He had been pulled into something extraordinary, something that began with a single act of instinct, a single moment of bravery that had saved a life. And in that realization, he felt a sense of anticipation, an understanding that the days ahead would be filled with choices, challenges, and perhaps unimaginable opportunities, even as sleep came slowly. He held on to one thought: that moment in the street. That split-second decision to act had changed everything. It had opened a door to a world he had never known, a world where his actions mattered in ways he could never have predicted. And whether he was ready or not, he knew he would be called to step through that door and see where it might lead. The next morning, the town looked ordinary once again, yet he saw it differently. Every face, every shadow, every sound carried meaning he had never noticed before. And somewhere deep inside, he waited, knowing that life had already begun to shift. And that, soon, the next chapter would arrive, bringing with it people, choices, and an offer no human could have imagined. Days passed after the stranger's first visit, and he could not stop thinking about them. Their calm, composed manner, the quiet authority in their words, and the way they had spoken about the woman he had saved, all of it lingered in his mind. Life in the town went on, but for him, nothing felt normal anymore. Even the routines he had once relied on, morning work, visits to the market, simple meals, felt different. As if everything had shifted in some invisible way. Every sound, every shadow, every movement of a passerby seemed charged with meaning. He realized he was waiting for something, though he did not know exactly what. Then, one morning it happened. The strangers returned. Unlike their first visit, this time they came with a purpose. With a presence that filled the quiet street with a sense of importance. He noticed them before they spoke, their movements deliberate and calm, their eyes searching for him with a quiet intensity. The moment he saw them, a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and anticipation filled his chest. He wondered what they wanted this time and whether it had anything to do with the woman he had saved. They approached him without hesitation, their expressions calm but serious. "We are here to offer you something," one of them said. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made him pause. "Something that will affect not only your life, but the lives of those around you. It is not something to take lightly." He felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The strangers began to explain. They spoke carefully, deliberately, ensuring that every word was clear and understood. They explained that the woman he had saved belonged to a community with a deep sense of honor and loyalty. A community that valued actions above words. Saving her life had been noticed, they said, and it had created a connection between him and their world. His act of bravery had not gone unnoticed, and now they were offering him a choice that no ordinary human would ever expect. He listened, stunned. He had acted instinctively, never imagining that one moment of courage could carry such importance. The strangers spoke of their community's principles: protection, loyalty, and respect. They explained that their offer was not about wealth or fame, but about security, opportunity, and the chance to make a difference in ways he had never imagined. It was a chance to step into a world that operated on rules different from anything he had ever known, a world where trust, honor, and bravery were valued above all else. At first, he did not respond. His mind raced, trying to process the words he had just heard. He had never considered that his actions could lead to something so significant. He had acted out of instinct, out of a desire to protect someone in danger. He had never thought about consequences beyond the immediate moment. And now here they were, offering him a role in a world that seemed almost unreal, a world he had never even imagined existed. The strangers were patient, sensing his hesitation. They explained that he was under no obligation to accept their offer. He could refuse and return to his ordinary life, and they would respect his choice. Yet, they emphasized that the opportunity was rare, perhaps once in a lifetime, and it would not come again. The weight of their words pressed on him, both thrilling and terrifying. He realized that his life had reached a turning point, one that required careful thought and courage beyond what he had known before. As they spoke, he thought about the woman, her safety, her gratitude, and the connection they had shared in that brief, intense moment of danger. All of it seemed intertwined with the offer before him. He wondered what she would think, whether she would approve, and whether accepting this offer might honor the risk he had taken to protect her. These thoughts filled him with both hope and uncertainty. The strangers went on to explain what accepting the offer would mean. It was not simply a reward, it was a responsibility. He would be granted protection, resources, and guidance. But he would also be expected to act with integrity, to honor commitments, and to uphold the values of their community. He would have the chance to influence the lives of others, to protect those in need, and to be part of a network that valued courage and morality. The choice was his alone. But the consequences were significant. He thought about his life before that. Datha, quiet routines. The small pleasures, the simple existence he had known. Accepting the offer would change everything. He would have to leave some parts of his old life behind, to step into an unfamiliar world, to embrace responsibility on a scale he had never imagined. And yet, he also felt a spark of excitement, a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. The opportunity was daunting, but it was also extraordinary. For hours, they spoke calmly, answering his questions and explaining every detail. They showed no pressure, no expectation beyond his honest consideration. Their respect for his choice was clear, and it made him feel valued in a way he had never felt before. He realized that this was not just an offer. It was a recognition of who he was, of the courage he had shown, of the potential they saw within him. By the end of their visit, he was left with a decision. Accepting the offer would open a door to a life far beyond the ordinary, life filled with challenge, responsibility, and opportunity. Refusing it would allow him to return to his previous life, simpler and familiar, but perhaps less meaningful in ways he could now see. The weight of the choice was heavy, yet he felt a strange clarity. He understood that courage was not only about protecting someone in danger, but also about making difficult decisions when the future is uncertain. That night, he sat alone, thinking about everything. He thought about the woman, about the strangers, and about the world that had suddenly become larger, more complex, and full of possibilities. He realized that his single act of bravery had connected him to something extraordinary, something beyond the ordinary limits of life in his small town. The gravity of the moment weighed on him, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known. He imagined the future, what it might be like to accept the offer, to step into a world of trust, honor, and responsibility. He considered the challenges, the risks, and the unknowns. And yet he also imagined the fulfillment, the sense of meaning, and the opportunity to make a real difference. He knew that no matter what he chose, his life had already changed, and he would never be the same again. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of what might be. He dreamed of streets filled with danger and courage, of moments where decisions mattered, and of the woman whose life had started it all. In his dreams, he felt both fear and hope, uncertainty and clarity, and he realized that life was no longer predictable or simple. It was vast, full of possibilities, and waiting for him to take the next step. By morning, he had made his choice. It was not a decision made lightly, nor one driven by desire for reward or recognition. It was a decision made from understanding, from courage, and from a sense of purpose awakened by the events of the past week. He understood that accepting the offer would bring new responsibilities, but it would also allow him to act in ways that aligned with the values he had discovered: courage, integrity, and loyalty. When he returned to meet the strangers, he did so with calm determination. They greeted him with quiet approval, sensing that he had reached his decision. And in that moment, he felt a deep connection, not only to them, but to the woman he had saved, to the community they represented, and to the path that lay ahead. His choice marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges, opportunities, and the chance to live a life guided by principles far beyond the ordinary. And though he could not see the full path before him, he knew this. A single act of courage had opened a door to a world he had never imagined, and he was ready to walk through it. After he made his choice, life began to feel different immediately. Even though the town looked the same, the streets, the buildings, and the people walking by all seemed part of a larger story he had only just begun to understand. He felt lighter in some ways, heavier in others. He had accepted the stranger's offer, not out of fear or desire, but out of purpose. The act of protecting the woman had set off a chain of events that had led him here and now. He understood that every choice he made could ripple far beyond what he could see. The strangers had explained that. His involvement with their community would be gradual. They did not expect him to know everything at once, nor to adapt immediately. Instead, they would guide him, teach him their ways, show him how to act with integrity, responsibility, and courage in situations he had never faced before. They emphasized that his role was not to seek recognition, but to be ready to protect, help, make wise choices whenever needed. He spent the first few days learning about their community and their principles. Their values were simple, yet profound: respect, loyalty, courage, and fairness. Every story they shared, every lesson they taught, was rooted in the understanding that a single act of bravery or kindness could change lives, sometimes in ways invisible to the world. Listening to their experiences, he began to realize how interconnected people could be, how one decision could affect not just the present, but the future in ways unimaginable. Yet, even as he immersed himself in this new world, he could not forget the woman. He thought of her often, wondering how she was doing, what she thought of everything that had happened, and whether she knew how much his life had changed because of that day in the street. He hoped she was safe and happy, and he hoped that the choices he made would honor the life he had protected. There was a quiet connection between them now, invisible but unbroken, and it gave him a sense of responsibility and purpose he had never felt before. Over the following weeks, he began to take on small tasks within the community. Nothing dangerous at first, but each task taught him discipline, patience, and the value of careful observation. He learned to notice details he had ignored before: the way people communicated without words, the importance of timing and decisions, and the subtle power of trust. Each lesson strengthened him, preparing him for moments when courage would once again be tested. Despite these lessons, he still had moments of doubt. He sometimes questioned whether he was ready for the responsibility he had accepted. Could an ordinary man truly meet the expectations of people so disciplined, so principled? Could he live up to the values he had come to admire? The questions troubled him, yet he knew that hesitation was natural. Growth, he realized, was often uncomfortable, and courage was tested not only in acts of bravery, but also in moments of self-doubt. Then, one day, the woman returned. She did not appear suddenly, as if out of nowhere. She came quietly, with a sense of purpose and calm. Seeing her again was overwhelming. Relief, joy, and a deep sense of connection surged through him. She had survived, she had thrived, and now she stood before him, a living reminder of the day that had changed everything. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, words were unnecessary. Gratitude, respect, and understanding passed between them effortlessly. The woman explained why she had been away, and why her community had been cautious. They had been ensuring her safety, observing the situation from a distance, and confirming that the man who had saved her truly acted with integrity. She told him that his courage had not only saved her life, but it also earned the respect of people who rarely acknowledged outsiders. Her words were simple, yet they carried weight, confirming the extraordinary significance of that single moment in the street. As the days passed, they worked together, sharing tasks, learning from one another, and slowly building trust. He discovered that her community valued collaboration, thoughtfulness, and moral courage as much as physical bravery. The lessons he had begun with the strangers now extended into a deeper understanding of people, relationships, and the responsibilities that came with power. Every day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow, to make choices that mattered, to act in ways that aligned with his values. He realized that his life had fundamentally changed, where once he had lived quietly, avoiding danger and responsibility. He now moved with intention, aware of the potential impact of every decision. Courage was no longer a fleeting instinct. It had become a guiding principle, a way of life. He understood that protecting others, standing for what was right, and acting with integrity were not occasional acts but consistent choices that defined a person. And yet, even in this extraordinary life, he remained grounded. He knew he could not predict the future, nor could he control every outcome. He had learned that life was unpredictable, that danger and opportunity often appeared together, and that wisdom lay in preparation, observation, and the courage to act when necessary. Every moment, every choice carried weight. But instead of fear, he felt determination. Instead of uncertainty, he felt purpose. The townspeople noticed the change in him as well. Though he continued to live among them, performing ordinary tasks and interacting politely, there was a calm confidence about him, a sense of quiet authority that had not been there before. People respected him, though they did not fully understand why. He carried himself differently, not because he sought recognition, but because his understanding of responsibility and courage had grown. His life had become a bridge between ordinary and extraordinary, between the familiar streets of his town and the larger, hidden world of honor and loyalty he had entered in the evenings. He often reflected on the journey that had begun with a single act, stepping in front of a woman to protect her from gunfire. He remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the uncertainty, and the quiet relief afterward. He understood now that that moment was more than instinct. It was a catalyst that had opened a new world to him, a world where his choices could influence lives, protect the vulnerable, and honor the values he had come to embrace. He also understood the true nature of the offer he had received. It was not a reward in the usual sense. It was not wealth, power, or status. It was trust, responsibility, and opportunity. It was a chance to live a life guided by principles, to act with courage when needed, and to contribute to a community that valued integrity above all else. Accepting it had changed him, but it had also revealed the potential that had always been within him. Waiting for the right moment to emerge, the woman became both a friend and a guide, helping him navigate this new world while reminding him of the courage that had brought him here. Together, they faced small challenges, worked on meaningful projects, discovered the quiet power of collaboration, trust, and shared purpose. He learned that courage was contagious, that the act of protecting one person could inspire others, create bonds, and shape communities in ways that were subtle but lasting. Months passed, and he grew into his role. He was no longer the man who had crouched in a street, uncertain and fearful. He was someone who understood the weight of his choices, the impact of courage, and the importance of integrity. He had learned that a single act, performed without expectation of reward, could set a course for a lifetime of meaning and purpose. And he had discovered that true bravery was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. In quiet moments, he would reflect on that day when everything changed. He would remember the chaos, the fear, and the sudden clarity that had driven him to protect her. He would recall the strangers, their calm authority, and the offer that had seemed almost impossible to imagine. And he would think of the woman whose life he had saved and whose presence had connected him to a world far beyond his own. Each memory was a reminder of how fragile life could be, how courage could shine in the darkest moments, and how one person's choices could shape the lives of many, he realized. Finally, that life would never be the same. He had stepped into a world of responsibility, honor, and connection that he had never known before. He had learned that courage and kindness could create opportunities no one could foresee, and he had discovered that in the most unexpected ways. A single act of selflessness could lead to experiences, friendships, and responsibilities that would define a lifetime. And so, his journey continued, not as an ordinary man in a quiet town, but as someone who had faced danger, acted with courage, and embraced a world full of honor, opportunity, and purpose. The act that had seemed simple, shielding someone from gunfire, had led to a life extraordinary in ways he could never have imagined. He had learned that courage, integrity, and selflessness were more than just words. They were a way of living, a compass to guide him through a world full of uncertainty and possibility. And with that understanding, he moved forward with quiet strength, ready for whatever came next, knowing that he had already stepped through the door to a life no human could have predicted, and that every choice from now on carried the power to shape not only his destiny, but the destiny of those around him. Word count, approximately 1,300 words.